Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube, you can actually be part of the conversation by clicking on the little link below. From there, you can register to Zoom, and then on the next event, you can actually click on the event, the link there, and you'll get to Makana, and that's where we ask questions and where we make comments and so on and so forth. If you think you can answer some of those questions, you'd be more than welcome to join our panel. And become part of the conversation. You just need to be here early. We do mic checks at 6:40 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Once we start doing the mic checks, that's as big as the panel is going to get for the day. You can come in early to test your system. We're slowly increasing the rigor in which the systems have to be. So it's good to come in early. 6 o'clock is when we open that door. And so come in early, and then at 7 o'clock, we'll start doing Q&A, general Q&A, which is what we're about to start right now. That can be any question around media or virtual production. So definitely join us for that. And the best thing to do is start asking questions early. Ask them often. The more questions we have at the beginning, the higher the velocity at which we answer them. If you ask a lot of questions at the middle to the end of the first hour, we won't have time to get to them. Today's going to be a unexpected 2 hours of Q&A due to a FedEx delay. We didn't get some of our hardware in for the AJA meeting, and so we're going to be moving that to next week. They were kind enough to allow us to move that to move the event a week out. So we're going to do that a week from today. We'll talk about the color analyzer and scopes and so on and so forth, and it's going to be great. So we'll do 2 hours of Q&A today, and then we'll be back to regular schedule. Tomorrow we're going to talk about TikTok, and on Friday we're going to talk about HLS streaming, just a very basic introduction to the process. Anyway, Bill, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Alrighty there. We're talking for first today of a question from James in Dublin, Ireland. What success have people had with collecting donations during a live broadcast over Zoom and on Facebook? What tools or processes have been the most successful?
Are there donation tools in Zoom? I'm actually not. I don't know of those. Facebook and YouTube both have donation tools that are built in. So there's the donation buttons. If you're a 501c3 and you go through the registration process and you work with them, you can actually get a donate button that they'll manage all of your processing for you. So that's possible on YouTube and Facebook that I know of. I don't know of any like that for Zoom. Go ahead and Grant.
Yeah, nothing yet, but it's one of those things that was flagged for the Zoom apps. So it'll be, those Zoom apps are something that will pop up as another panel, like the participants or the chat, and it'll be basically a little web window, and so you'll be able to integrate that. I'm surprised we still haven't seen those pop up yet in the wild, but that'll be great when they come, because you'll be able to incorporate a bunch of those different donate services and things like that exactly for this purpose directly in Zoom.
Go ahead, Courtney, and then Jeffrey.
I'm not sure what he's using, but I know Aaron Parecki on his show has something called Super Chat, and whenever somebody makes a contribution, it shows up as a special chat thing. I don't know if he's using the Zoom chat engine or something else.
Just YouTube.
Yeah, YouTube has its own Super Chat. So that's all part of the YouTube process. Yeah.
So you can do it in YouTube, not Zoom.
Yeah, and that's less of a donation and more people just paying for exposure. But it's but there are, because there's how you process it depends on what the platform is. Go ahead, Jeffrey. Obviously, Twitch has a bunch of stuff as well. Jeffrey?
Yeah, the only donations that I know of in Zoom is actually on the On Zoom program. You can do a donation system there, but not in Zoom itself.
Yeah, and we have we've worked with a variety of folks that do it. I think some of the things beyond the technology of doing it is figuring out how to engage folks. Some folks want to give money for exposure, so making sure that especially if they're a large donor, that money is showing up somewhere. Tickers work really well with little names and how much they gave going across the bottom is useful in that area. Goals, and especially if you can get folks to match it, like some corporation's going to match up to $100 or $1,000 or $5,000. Those kinds of things are great for the sponsor because they sit up there for a little while, as well as good for folks. It gives them an urgency to do that. So there's a lot of like techniques beyond just the technology. Go ahead, Chris.
I'll say that on Ripple's YouTube Live and also on Joseph's YouTube show, on more than one occasion, I have thrown in a modest chat, super chat, just to encourage other people to do it. And it's interesting if you're trying to earn money, sometimes, you know, putting a couple bucks in the tip jar on the counter reminds people, oh, I should be putting money in here. And putting a 5 or a 10 in there encourages people to possibly give more than just a couple bucks.
What's funny is that most of the folks we work with that have done it, they will pull money out of their own account, and then they have people put it back in, you know, and so they, you know, so they, and that can be up to a couple $1,000s that they'll just put in small increments that are just rolling in to show action. And then it's the same thing that you would see, is exactly what Chris is talking about. The same thing you would see in it. Yeah. And you know, showing a pile of money in someone's hat when they're playing on the street, you know, encourages people to put more money in. So go ahead, Roscoe.
Aaron actually goes one step further, a la flamethrower that you had described earlier. His background changes to the color that matches the amount of his donation.
Oh, nice.
So that everyone on screen sees it.
That's great. Yep. Next question.
Ray Maxwell from the panel here in Vancouver, British Columbia, says, I'm producing files from an iPhone Pro Max, Final Cut Pro 10, and compressor that all say they're Dolby Vision in the inspector. Did Apple license Dolby Vision such that we can produce files without an individual license from Dolby?
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, you can, I'm not sure what the terms are, but yeah, you're able to now use Dolby Vision inside of the Apple product lines, and you know, once it comes in, it will be it looks pretty amazing, actually. I mean, if you actually look at the footage, I've been shooting a lot of Vision with the pros and testing it and pushing its levels out, and it's pretty amazing. It's a lot better than the past when you especially if you shoot with 8-bit and then Vision, and you can shoot that Vision with, of course, the built-in phone, but Filmic also has it built into it. The one thing to be careful with is that Filmic, when you set it to Filmic Extreme, that is not Dolby Vision. You have to scroll down to the hidden switch. This is what we all miss. All of us missed it when it first came out. Scroll down to the hidden switch where you click on Dolby Vision and turn that on. Go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, I also have produced Dolby Vision files, or so it's labeled in QuickTime Player, and uploaded them to YouTube. And I put a link in the chat if people want to take a look at my first attempt to do HDR on YouTube.
Well, I think that the only thing there, and I'll be interested to see it on YouTube, is that just remember that YouTube does not support Vision. It supports HDR10 and HLG. So,
right. And it converts it. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. But I uploaded it in Dolby Vision, but it was converted. But then that brings my second question, but we'll wait till we get to it.
All right, great. All right, next question.
Which is Ray's second question from Vancouver. When I play back YouTube HDR, high dynamic range files, in Safari, I find that it does not show HDR in my Asus monitor, but shows up as HDR on my Apple XDR monitor. How does YouTube know which monitor I have it on?
Go ahead, Jason.
It doesn't. That's part of the problem. My guess is that your Asus monitor is going to be a non-Vision standard. It's going to be an HLG. Someone stopped me here, but you know, it's going to be something that's different. Is that about right?
Well, here's the thing, though. When you play back HDR on the XDR monitor, down at the little the little settings thing, it labels it HDR, saying I'm playing HDR, and I move it over to the Asus and refresh it, and the HDR goes away, and it plays it in straight 4K.
Yeah, so it's not YouTube, it's the device. It's the device interaction. So basically, what happens is that your device, whether it's an Apple TV or a phone or your computer, what they're doing is they I promise that this is what's happening. This is they're IDing the device that they're connected to. That device may be HDR, but if it doesn't ID correctly back to the computer will say, well, that's an SDR solution, and it will typically either go to the SDR encode if YouTube is creating that, or it'll do a tone map, to go down to it. But that's actually what's happening, and there's a lot of different variations of that process. This is my world a lot, of identifying which monitor they're talking to and making decisions about what content is being served up based on the monitor that's connected at that time and where that video is showing up.
But that HDR label is coming from YouTube.
I know, but the HDR label is coming from YouTube, but it's being told from the device what is there. What am I connected to?
What's that mechanism? How does it talk back to YouTube? It's got to talk to YouTube to tell it what monitor it's on.
If you're in Safari, Safari's talking back to YouTube, and it's asking for a different HLS stream.
Okay.
So it's so the HLS is coming in a different, and it's both an HDR and an SDR, and it's asking for a different part of that ladder. So it goes, I don't have that. That monitor doesn't have that. So give me the other ladder now. So typically what YouTube is most likely doing is taking those. I don't know what YouTube's doing engineering wise, but I can guess pretty well that basically they're building an HDR ladder and they're building an SDR ladder inside of HLS. And basically when it's told that it has a device with a SDR, it will go grab the content from that ladder or the other, and it's doing that on the fly. You can probably drag it over while it's playing, and it'll change because it'll change at the next segment. And
One last comment. I am licensed to fly a drone on that airport and do it completely legally. I've already had somebody write in the comments, hey, what are you doing flying on an airport? I am licensed for it.
That's great. That's great. Bill, and then Jason.
Yeah, so for monitors, I have always thought of them as dumb devices, but actually they're not. So I'm wondering if a monitor needs a firmware update that you should do.
Well, the monitor may not be HDR. I don't know if the Asus monitor is an HDR monitor, so or properly an HDR monitor. So it's just saying this is what I am, and it's not saying this is what I am. If the monitor doesn't say explicitly that I am capable of handling this HDR, it assumes that it can't. So the devices generally assume that if the monitor isn't coming back and saying I'm an HDR monitor or I'm a Vision monitor or an HDR10 monitor, HLG monitor, it's going to assume that it's old enough that it doesn't even know what that is, and then it gives it an SDR feed. Go ahead, Jason, and then Richard.
It's actually even further than that. If it doesn't show up as HDR in Mac OS, meaning you check that box, if Mac OS doesn't show it as HDR compliant, then you're not going to even have that chance. As far as the way that that's done on the web, it's the same way that if you've ever tried Apple TV full screen replay, HDCP will not work through an SDR or an SDI monitor. I've had that problem with issues.
And remember, we're talking about HDMI interactions, not SDI interactions, which have to be then explicitly set in the monitor.
Oh, I know. I'm saying I've had a similar issue.
I'm just adding to that. Is that we're not talking about an SDI transport, because the SDI transport has to be managed explicitly by the monitor, and the monitor will be told what the monitor inside has to have its own lookup tables to make that work. Go ahead, Richard.
Exactly on those sort of lines. You are within both within the Mac OS and the actual display settings. You can set quite often the HDR range that the monitor is dealing with. So with the XDR display, for example, if you don't set it to XDR or HDR mode, you're not going to access that stuff in YouTube either. So it's got to be set there and quite often in the monitor. So if you connect I think it's the LG CX series TVs directly, you've got to make sure they're set to a particular mode in the monitor before the computer will actually push or recognize the HDR going into them.
And then, of course, most of the monitors made, I think, in the last year from Apple, they may not be 1,000 nits, but they will all tone map properly from an HDR signal. So your laptop or your phone or your iPad will say, hey, I'm an HDR display, and then tone map it into the nit value that they are capable of. I think that those range anywhere from 300 to 1,600 nits, for the different outputs. Next question.
Richard Mueller in Johannesburg, South Africa. What's the best contact cleaner for the cable connections on the inside of monitors and other sensitive electronics? And would that be any different to what one would use on exposed ports like SDI ports on the back of a camera or switcher?
Anyone have any strong opinions about that? Alcohol.
They're all toxic. Be careful. That's my input.
He also notes that he's in Cape Town. The air is salty. He must be near ocean water, so that's an issue.
Typically, it's been. What I mostly use is alcohol spray. That's 601. I'm not familiar with that one specifically. Go ahead, Guy.
We sell a lot of what's called keg deoxit, so I'll put a link in the chat.
Okay. Yeah. So you got what? Can you repeat it again?
KEIG, CAIG, deoxit, and there's fader lube as well for those of you that are using. I see Jeff raising his hand. Go for it, Jeff.
You go, Jeff.
Yeah, I've used all the keg stuff too, and for just cleaner, I've used TF solvent. I'm gonna look for a link for that. It's basically alcohol with propellant.
Stuart? Courtney?
I don't think you can get TF solvent anymore in the United States. I think they outlawed it for good this year. It used to be heinously expensive. I use the R5 with the deoxit, and it seems to work fairly well.
Great. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, just one last thought on the matter. You are so much better off using, 10% contact cleaner and 90% just careful elbow grease and just go slow. You really do not need very much contact cleaner. I go so far as to only put a tiny amount on an implement and then just ever so slightly brush
Richard,
it.
what are you showing? What are you showing there, Richard? Yeah, a little brush. Can't hear you. You're so quiet.
You're muted.
Actual sensor swabs, like used sensor swabs from a camera sensor, are fantastic for cleaning small electronics once you can't use them in the camera anymore.
That's great. Next question.
Well, too.
Michael Fisk of Spokane Valley is up next, and I'm getting 2 small softboxes today and would like to see or hear how to place them in order to eliminate the eye lens glare.
The generally, the main thing is angle of incidence equals angle of reflection. So if you look at your, literally, if you just look at where your camera is and you if you think about a pool table, you think of it going in, you can just look up and see if I turn my glasses, there's my lights right there, and I turn them back down, and I've had to place them so that they're comfortably higher than my glasses, so that light reflects. But it's the simple math of the angle that it's coming in from your camera. Just envision that angle, and then go up a little bit, and usually is also pleasing as far as cutting your chin out a little bit. Both of those tend to go together. Go ahead, for me anyway. Bill?
I also just wanted to note that the shape of the glasses themselves will sometimes have an effect depending on your prescription and how much curvature. We've all seen wraparound style glasses that somebody may think looks cool, but that's going to give you all sorts of reflections off to lights on the side that a more flat pair of glasses would not if your prescription allows it.
Next question.
Moving on to Jeff Francis of Columbia, South Carolina. Blackmagic Design HyperDeck Studio Mini. How do I view the firmware version currently installed?
That should be in the... So I think you actually, if you don't have the panel on the front, you should get one for the HyperDeck Mini. So there's you can buy these. I think that you can buy that HyperDeck Mini without the panel, and I think that it's hard to. Can you buy it without the panel?
No, you can't buy it without the panel. So I think it shows in the panel, but I'm going to check that right now.
It does not show it in the panel.
It should be in the settings. I mean, it should be in. There's a system info in that.
No, he's right. It's not in the panel. I'm rolling through it right now.
It's also not in the update utility. When you connect it via USB, it asks you to update, but it doesn't tell you what version it had or what version it's going to.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and I didn't see in the Atem software, connected over Ethernet either.
I don't know. We periodically just go back and find whatever the newest thing is and update them, but I've never actually looked at what the update was on. Usually we look at like what we know because we updated it to that file, but interesting. I don't know.
What about FTP?
I'm checking that right now. I don't see that you do.
Some kind of
request
telnet
a status or something.
Yeah, there might be a telnet command that would pull it back out on a return, but I don't. Yeah, I don't have an answer for that one. I thought for sure it was in there, but I think we just update them. We just know what the update is, and then we just assume that that's what it's at. But next question.
Ricardo Hicks of Raleigh, North Carolina. My Blackmagic software controller is only seeing 2 of my 4 available mix effects buses. Am I missing something? I've updated to the firmware and software.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
I honestly don't know how that's possible.
I do. I know how it's possible.
Well, go ahead, Alex.
Your screen isn't big enough. Try. So the funny thing about the way that the Atem software works is if you make your screen smaller, you won't see it. So you have to pull your Atem software out to be large enough so that it can actually display all 4 MEs. It's a funny thing that you can actually, if you just take your screen on your Atem software on a 4ME and scrunch it up a little bit, you'll just notice that MEs disappear so that it can continue to display what it can display within that resolution. We've had this problem before. so anyway, you should be able to, in a 1080p screen, it should be fine. In a 720p screen, you won't be able to see 4 MEs. You'll only be able to see, I don't know what you're using, but if you're trying to put it into a corner or you're not going full screen with it, in the 4ME, you need it to be large enough for it to comfortably display that information. So, but it's dynamic. It will turn things off if it doesn't have enough room to display them. Next question.
Paul Prusakowski in Gainesville, Florida says, does anyone have any experience or thoughts on using live-to-air or rivet.stream as alternatives to vMix Call for managing remote guests who are not very techy? A technical note, live-to-air is built on WebRTC, same as vMix Call, and Rivet Stream uses SRT.
For live-to-air, we did some early tests and we had a lot of problems with Dante. And so as a result, we stopped using it. So that was the initial piece there. Rivet looks interesting. I'm going to guess because it's an SRT back end that its latency will be considerably higher than WebRTC or Zoom. So I mean, a lot of the reason that we tend to lean towards Zoom is that it is as our backhaul is because A, a lot of people know how to use it, and B, the latency is actually lower than most of the other services. So we see latency of Zoom at about 220 milliseconds. Latency on Skype per leg is about in the mid 300s to 400 milliseconds. And then after that, all the other ones start to get higher. We see Blue Jeans, other ones like that in the kind of the 450 to 500 range. And then Rivet, they've talked about going less than 500 milliseconds. I haven't seen it. I haven't seen SRT be stable under 500 milliseconds. So, and it may seem like a small number, half a second, but I can feel it. Like, you can definitely feel it in conversations when it's slower. And so it's just not as fluid as it is when it's a lower piece. So that's my 2 cents on that. Anyway, go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, I was just going to note that I'm on the other side of the world and looking at the stats in Zoom now. I'm sitting around 200 milliseconds as the latency that it reports in here. That I'm sending 1080 at 26 frames at the moment, and it's it's great. It works really well. It's interesting. I had a conversation with someone who was, I do lots of conferences where we bring in remote presenters. We might have 50 remote presenters that we bring in for an event, and they were doing something through WebRTC, and they, one of those, kind of in-browser based things, and they had lots of presenters. And I was really quizzing them. I wanted them to say it was a terrible experience and it would have been way easier in Zoom. Generally, they said, actually it was fine, and, had no problems. And I said, so what about when people, were selecting the wrong camera, or they're, selecting the wrong audio device, and they have to go into their browser settings, and they can get really wacky, And what I discovered is on that event, they weren't really doing that. Like their quality control for that event was that, we can see and hear them. Tick, right. Whereas we have a higher standard. We're wanting to get a really good sound quality, and we want to get a good video image as well. And whenever you want to do that, I feel like Zoom's the way to go.
Yeah. And I think that, just Zoom has a lot more control, especially now they've added a lot of the control with the audio, that you really get a great system. And then I have to say that when we figured out how to take someone's presentation deck, what they're presenting, along with their video in a Zoom room as 2 separate feeds into our switcher, we're kind of done. Like, we're done here. Nothing else does that I know of, that I can pull both of those, that presentation feed and the person as 2 separate 1080p streams, from their computer bandwidth, available. After that, I mean, we just stopped looking, admittedly, because we just do so many business events with folks that are desperate to show their slides. Anyway, next question.
Doug Johnson of Orem, Utah is in next with most Atem switchers are capable of supporting Rec 2020, but how would someone flag the output as such so that it can be encoded and uploaded as HDR?
So you can flag it in a couple different places. One place to flag that is in an FSHDR. So AJA you'll see that we'll be talking about that a little bit next week in conjunction with the color analyzer. So you get an FSHDR is a great way to. I mean, it's expensive. It's expensive for some folks, but that app on the way through you can flag the information there, and then some encoders can actually flag the information. So within an elemental, for instance, we can flag the content as HDR, whether it's HDR10 or HLG or Vision, and then it will do the proper. It's tagging it as well as doing some transformations. So that's how you have to flag it to get it out. And I'm not sure. I mean, the only thing I'm really familiar with in that respect are the elementals as far as that goes. Elementals and Atem are the two encoders that I know of that do it, but I know that there must be more, given that YouTube made it more widely available. And it's something I'm hoping to test later this week or early next week as far as streaming to YouTube in HDR10. Go ahead, Richard.
In terms of some of that flagging and control, you can actually do it with a lot of LUT boxes as well, at least the higher end ones. But that's very detailed and very careful work. The nice thing with the Arja is that it's kind of just built in and labeled and ready to go with 80% of the workflows out there, kind of.
Yeah. One of the there's a couple different ways. One thing to know is that you can even just pass log through and then do it. It's just a matter of what the encoder is going to do to the content and how you're managing the exposure. So one of the ways that we've done it is actually just run log. The log curve on Blackmagic cameras, for instance, is so close to the PQ curve that we can actually just manage the exposure and get something out the other end without too much trouble. So you can. There's a lot of ways. Remember that all that tag is just saying it's telling the display what it's getting. Otherwise it's just an image. HLG has no metadata at all. HLG is just, I'm going to give you an SDR feed, and then I'm going to give you a transformation on top of that you'll either see or you won't. HDR10 actually carries metadata that is going to talk about the highs and lows and a variety of other transformations within it, but over an entire event. Whereas Vision will do that can do that theoretically every frame. It's typically every scene that it's going to send that data. However, most of our software can't carry that. Most of our hardware can't carry that data. So you can't pass the HDR10 or oftentimes you can't pass the HDR10 or the Vision data over an SDI stream. Now that's going to change, as we get into things like 2110 and possibly even SDI, but it hasn't yet. The data is small enough that you could put it, for instance, on line 21, but it's not available yet. Go ahead, Stuart.
Change mouse and it works. Could we get a little bit more information on the PQ curve for those people who don't know anything about it?
It's a whole nother hour. so we'll do another HDR talk where we're talking about that. Talking about comparing. We've talked about HDR a little bit, but we'll make sure that we've got a couple key people in here to talk about it, and then we'll cut into the HLG, HDR10, as well as PQ and log. Go ahead, Richard.
I've got an interesting scenario coming up where I might have to tone map several monitors manually based on SCI feeds and their capabilities all at the same time. So, for example, having an XDR, like an Apple XDR with Blackmagic Teranex on the back, taking SDI signal in 4K, next to a DM250 OLED, next to a Sony OLED, next to an LG CX, next to, and so forth. So,
yep.
So
you're knee deep in it. We're going to make sure that you're, if we schedule an if we schedule an HDR one, we're going to make sure that you're available to be in our conversation. So, but we'll do that in the next couple of weeks. It's definitely something I'm thinking about a lot, and it's something I want us to understand as we move into. It's one of the reasons that we are managing HDR. Is one of the reasons we're going to be doing Resolve training. It's just because while there is HDR support within the Final Cut and Motion and everything else, it's not as detailed. And so I want to make sure that people have the detailed understanding of how to work with that stuff. But we will be talking about Final Cut and everything else as well in the future. But we'll be doing some in-depth Resolve training, and before that, some HDR discussions, so that we know why it's important for us to do that. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, just a quick dumb guy question here. I'm looking for where you got those numbers, Grant. I was assuming that it was under settings and statistics, but I'm not seeing anything that talks about what the delay is there.
There should be a latency setting there. You should see latency within the statistics. You have statistics for video and
then video, yeah.
Yeah, in the video settings there. There's a couple different windows.
Ah, okay. See, on my end, I'm showing 37 milliseconds.
It says that. I'm not sure exactly what that means because we measure it. So when I'm saying 220 milliseconds, I'm saying I put an iPad in front of a webcam, and then I'm looking at the window on the other side and comparing the frames. You know, like it's a different. When we measure it, we see 200. We don't see 37. You know, from that. And so I'm not sure what that number means, to be honest.
Okay, yeah, because that to me sounds like it would be something, you know, critically important when you have multiple feeds from all over the planet.
Yeah, I mean, generally we found that most people can. What we have to realize is if we're on a conference call, for instance, you're at 200, 250 milliseconds. I mean, you know, like you're not. If you ever talk to someone on a phone when you're in the same room, that's the only time you're conscious of the delay. That's occurring all the time. So under a quarter second, you can get away with it. Over a quarter second, you start to feel it. Next question.
Moving on to Paul Wallace's question from Austin, Texas. And Paul says, let's talk about the Matrix app, which Leland Best showed us in the pre-show. It turns your smartphone or tablet into a virtual stream deck.
Well, there is an app that Elgato makes that turns your camera into a stream deck. so yeah, go ahead, Roscoe.
I was going to say, yeah, Touch OSC. There's the web app inside BitFocus. I mean, it's not the only thing in town. The one thing real quick that John Hiddleston and I are talking about, a professor walks in with their iPhone. If you open up all the Touch OSC commands in that room, all the intelligence is contained on that iPhone. So that as long as that iPhone can talk to Touch OSC, you have all this unique control over this Zoom interface. So that's why we're looking at the different apps. Which one is the easiest one to walk in and give total control over a system?
Yep, absolutely. Next question.
Tim Turner of Eagle, Wisconsin is up with, does anyone use cell phone gimbals? And if so, which one do you prefer? Also, what's your application for them?
Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, they're good for doing behind-the-scenes footage on feature films and the like. My personal preference is the Zhiyun ones, which are a competitor to DJI. They also make a range they just changed the mount from phone to action cam, but the actual guts of it is the same. And
what's can you repeat the name of the USB? Can you repeat the name of the company?
Zhiyun.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Jason?
They've been reliable.
Yeah, absolutely. Jason?
I've used both the Osmo 3 and the Osmo 4, and I could not be more impressed. The most recent one has a magnetic clip to the phone, so you're not just standing around, with the phone. You can actually put it, in a holster so that it's away and out of the way, and then just dunk, it goes right on, and it perfectly aligned, and I couldn't be happier.
And Ray, I see that you're using a DJI there.
Yeah, this one. Just to mention, this is the Mobile 2 and the 3. They work with Filmic Pro and Halide as well as the native app.
Yeah, so I am interested in Stuart's suggestion mostly because I really take umbrage in the fact that DJI will not allow me to use the gimbal without registering and turning on their app. Like, there's no reason for that. Like, it's just like there's, and it's I find it abhorrent that I do that. I just haven't been happy with any of the other ones that I've tested. I keep on testing other ones going, I need this to be as good as the DJI one because I just don't want to use DJI's. I don't want to register and have to install an app and tie it all in just to use a piece of hardware. Like it just doesn't make any sense to me. Go ahead, Jason.
Just so you know, Alex, after you've done that registration, first, I agree with you. I think that's appalling. But after you've done that registration, you can get rid of the app completely, and the
I know you
camera app will
can.
still work.
The fact that it's just like at a level of,
Oh yeah,
of
it offends
Big
me
Brother, it's offending. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actively looking for something else for my next gimbal, and so I'll take a look at what Stuart was talking about there, because I haven't been happy with it because of that. But otherwise, I will say that the hardware itself works exceptionally well. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Jason Bache here on the panel from Albuquerque. What are the resolution of Prompter People's ultralight 12 HB teleprompter with 12-inch reversing high bright monitor? Are there high bright displays 4:3? And if I run a 1080p SDI signal through it, will it scale appropriately as well as reverse my desktop without running the software?
What's the price on that?
They're pretty cheap. I want to say under $1,000.
Yeah, I mean, because the one that I've gotten a lot in that price range is the iCan, which I know a lot better than that one. So I use a lot of the Prompter People stuff at the larger sizes, the 24s. I've bought, I don't know how many from them, and so I've been pretty happy with those. At the 12-inch size, there's a portable one from iCan that I'm pretty happy with. That is some lower resolution, but you can properly scale it. It'll natively scale to 4:3, just the way you talked about it, but you can have it scale down to 16:9. You can flip the screens. You can, it's relatively durable. It compacts really well. As far as breaking down, it's one thing the Prompter People stuff doesn't do very well is breakdown, or at least the ones that we bought. They're kind of a art project to move them around. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I'll agree with all of that. I will say Prompter People's been around for a long time and have a pretty robust business, so I would expect them to at least understand the basics, and all those things like reversing and flipping and stuff like that should be built in by this point.
Yeah, I'm going to guess that it's a 4:3 monitor because almost all of them are in the smaller range. And that has to do, I think, with cost as well as the fact that a lot of times you want 4:3, to go to center cut it. And Courtney can probably talk to that more than I can. But when I use the larger ones primarily for eye-to-eye contact. So I'm not putting text on them, I'm putting people on them. And so then those are just standard HDMI monitors. And then, for the installations that we do, we just build them. We just build them from scratch. So it's a piece of glass, just properly oriented. So next question.
Moving on to Paul Wallace again from Austin, Texas. Can we do a watch party at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time for the Hop-In rollout event? They just acquired Stream Deck. Hop-In CEO Johnny Bonfarhaf, I don't know, and StreamYard CEO Jorg Vandertop, I hate names on stage for the first time discussing the state of virtual events and what to expect in 2021. And I only hate them because I have to pronounce them and I'm incompetent at some of those.
Try to get Grant.
Just a clarification that they bought StreamYard, not Stream Deck. Yeah, different thing. I read that and I was like, "What? That doesn't make any sense." And yeah, it was StreamYard.
People are more than welcome to do it. I can't support anything in the middle of the day. It's just too much. I got other things on my plate. I have to admit that it took me a little while to think about my kind of thought process around it. And I think that what I'm interested in is more of what I would call a scalable conversation or a interactive broadcast. And I think I'm finding that I'm not as interested in virtual events the way we think of them. I've had to think about that definition because I call it virtual events and I call it there, but I realize that I don't find them to be like trying to reproduce. I find virtual events in the way that I think of it is an event that is trying to reproduce a physical event in the old fashioned way that we did that into that. Whereas I'm more interested in how do we build something that we have a kind of a scalable conversation, where it's probably closer to broadcast than an event, and it's regular, it's over time, that's what we're doing here. I'm not sure that I've realized that as I start to bid on things, I'm pushing clients that direction, and there'll be some point where I might not bid on them anymore. Like the quote unquote, we're going to do something in 2 or 3 days, over that, just because I don't think that I don't think it's the future. I think that constant contact with your constituency is going to be more important than I believe that the 3-day event, the 2-day event, the 5-day event was created out of a constraint of time and space, which we don't have anymore. And so we can do something different when we're not constrained by that. So we're still kind of doing the old fashioned thing, in those things. So that's why I'm not that interested in Hopin. So anyway, next question.
Moving on, Tony Adamopoulos of Missouri is in with better mic choice for primarily voiceover. A Behringer Xenix 802 USB mixer is in play, so he's looking at either an SM58 or an AT2020 AV newbie home office environment.
Go ahead, Bill.
Two totally different kinds of mics. You've got a dynamic and you've got a large diaphragm condenser. The dynamic is going to be much more focused and less sensitive. The 2020 is going to be much more open and responsive. So it's one of those it depends things. If you really have sound control in where you're recording and they're not computer fans and stuff like that, then the AT2020 will give you more resolution on the voiceover. But if you have problems, the SM58 will probably suppress some of that background stuff and give you an ability to work right at the mic and get more signal, less noise.
Go ahead, John Preto.
I've had all of these devices. The Behringer preamps are super noisy. Out of those 3 choices for a home office environment, I'd go with the AT2020.
Yeah, the AT2020 is that a USB option? Does it have a direct USB connection?
Not unless there's a new version. The traditional ones have been around for 30 years, and they'll all just be XLR balanced.
I believe that there's one that is basically the AT2020 that has a USB out, and it'll be cleaner than going through a mixer. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, it's AT2020 USB is the USB model. Okay. And even though it looks like a large diaphragm, that's actually a sort of a 1/2-inch diaphragm in a box. It's a great mic for $100, but it's certainly not a large diaphragm mic. They just put it in that for marketing reasons.
Yeah. So I
they
would
modernize the traditional.
Well, the Shure SM7B is same capsule as this little guy here. So anyway, to what John Preto said is that your mixer is your real problem. You're better off getting a direct to USB mic, whatever that is for voiceovers, than you are continuing to go through that Behringer. We love Behringer on the higher end, the X32s and up and the XR18s and everything else. But the old analog stuff is not good. Not Courtney.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think the dynamics have much lower voltage out for that particular mixer, and so you're gonna have to crank it up all the way, and then that way you get all the self noise in the mixer. But I'll put in 2 cents for the TZ. Cost $100 more than the AT2020, but I like the Stellar X2 sound wise, but it's a large diaphragm condenser. Cardio.
The thing I always think of every time I think about voiceovers was an SM58 is the behind the scenes video of Mike Rowe doing, I guess he does most of the voiceovers for dirty jobs with an SM58 under a blanket in a hotel. Like we think about all the things we discuss about how to do voiceovers, and that whole show is all him on an SM58 under a blanket. Go ahead, Chris, and then Jeff.
Or possibly he did one highly publicized
maybe
voiceover under a bunch of cushions in a hotel.
I wouldn't be surprised if he does a lot of them that way, only because he's on the road.
Fine. If you know how to use a mic, a little
not
bump,
live. Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, Jeff.
If he's willing to go up in price, that new Shure MV7 that's both XLR and USB.
Yeah,
it's not an SM7, but it's $250. But that's been sounding great for Paul. And if you are interested, there's some great YouTube videos of Shure got some new air conditioners brought into their factory by helicopter, and they decided to take an SM58 up in the helicopter and drop it into their parking lot and pick it up and plug it in and talk into it. So that's great fun.
Indestructible. These things, you literally can hammer something in and then use it. All right, next question.
Rick Coombs of Columbia, Tennessee. Is there a way to control 2 TV monitors that are back to back? I need them to display the same content. I cannot see the front monitor in a store window facing outside. I need them to play several videos that are in a loop, maybe even my YouTube channel.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
A trick, because they're going to be in a glass, that sometimes the remote will just bounce off the glass panel in front and trigger everything. I don't exactly know what he means by control, but if you just need to control them with a wireless remote, and if you have to, go put a piece of black paper on that front piece of glass, and it'll really become a good mirror.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, see if you can find a monitor that's got a HDMI loop out. Then you can have whatever your media is on the USB stick in the one that's facing you that you can control, loop out from that into the second monitor that's facing your crowd.
Bill and then Jason.
And if your monitor doesn't have a loop out, you can get a little device. Triplite makes them that takes HDMI and splits it. It takes a little wall wart to power it. And so you put one HDMI in, get two HDMI outs, and they work fine.
Good, Jason.
I interpreted this question completely differently and had nothing to do with IR. My immediate thought was get a Blackmagic, HDMI to dual SDI, roll SDI out of both of them, and that way you've got identical color control. And with the 6G SDI, you've got 4K, and you can even load a LUT in there.
The other thing to know is that with IR control over those over TVs, things like Harmony and other things have basically an IR transmitter that is talking to it. And one of the things that we've done in the past is build a little bump, and we put the transmitter right over top of the receiver in the monitor, and then tape it shut, specifically so that nothing from the outside world can interact with it, and it's just the IR talking to the transmitter and the receiver are right in front of each other, talking to each other. But that allows us to have a wired control over the camera. Or over the TV, and we still have wireless control, but it's as many TVs as we want, and it's wired. So it's something to think about. Next question.
Manfred Olmer is next from West Covina, California. Is there a way to force higher res in Zoom webinars? On Guy's hint, I purchased an Alexa Show 8 to kick up my Zoom res, only to have my company's account be granted 1080 quality before I arrived, but it's only for meetings. Any tricks for webinars?
You have to make a good case to do it. You have to make a good case to Zoom. So you send an email in to Zoom, and you need to outline why it's important that you have 1080. Usually it's high profile. It is resolution dependent. It is, but high profile and resolution dependent are the things that you can't just ask for it. I don't think I would have gotten it for this group without a fair bit of cajoling by various members of the group. So there was a lot of pressure applied. So it's difficult to get for webinars. Yeah. Next question.
Shane McNamara of Des Moines, Iowa.
Go ahead, Chris, real quick.
1080 has historically been quite difficult to get for webinars, but it's getting easier. Our own Doug Ferguson, who I guess slipped out, recently got it on his account, and he did it like in less than a week.
Yeah, so it's getting easier, but it's still it's just a very bandwidth intensive service for them, and if you don't have a lot of people with the right bandwidth, it's actually not a great experience for them either. So that's the other issue there. Next question.
Okay, we're moving on to Shane McNamara, Des Moines, Iowa. And Shane asks, Raspberry Pi is arriving today with a touchscreen. Any recommended projects other than Companion Pi to run on it?
Go ahead, Stuart.
The version of a Pi that imitates the streaming bridge.
Where's the streaming bridge? Oh, interesting. Yeah, and then Jonas Attell is going to be on. And we're going to have him on talking about reproducing the hyperdeck with a Pi, and he's coming on, I believe, next week. So I have to, so it's coming soon. Go ahead, Jason.
You got me. Hyperdeck was going to be my call.
Yep, absolutely. Next question.
Comes from the Maranatha Spanish Church, Grand Rapids, Michigan. I was almost ready to buy the digital mixer and use the wire snake because the digital one cost $10,000, but yesterday's show poured freezing water on it. Wow, do I use the Behringer, or where do I get more info? Maybe that's now do I use the Behringer, or where do I get more info?
Anyone? I need to look at that question a little deeper here.
I think this isn't this the question where Alex, you allowed everybody to go down the analog solutions and sat there like an evil genius petting your kitty, waiting for digital to come up? It's
yeah, I
that
mean,
question, is it not?
yeah. Go ahead, Jeff.
Dante.
Yeah, Dante. Yeah, the I think that for the church, I think what you need to do is you need to allow us to you tell us what you're doing, like how many channels and where do the channels go, and so knowing how much it costs you. It's if it's just 6 channels. I don't remember if that was the exact same person.
I
But
vaguely remember it was. He said he
so
had
it's
6 channels. He had to run 200 feet.
Yeah, and what happened,
okay if
I
that's the
remember it too. He has a
yeah
church service
right.
thing and they want to remote it outside. So
So
they have
if you
old
could do
XLR
that,
infrastructure.
you could literally do that with two. You could do it with there's a couple different things. Number one is you could have a Dante box, but you could do it literally with 2 X32 rack mounts, if you wanted to, or an X32 and you use a rack mount as the end product. That'll cost you $1,500 with the Dante card, and then you have an X32 with sliders, and that'll cost you, I don't know, $2,000 with the Dante card. And then you have it over the network. And one of the questions that I think came up in the pre-show, if not the pre-show, was a discussion about how far you can run Dante. It's just a network. It's a network protocol. You have to manage your network, but it can run through switches and do all the other things it needs to do. Ultranet, which is what the Behringer works on, which would give you a nice, cool S8 or S16 or whatever would be less expensive, does not run over the network. It is not a network protocol. It is a point-to-point protocol. So if you're going to use one of those breakouts, you need to run an Ethernet from the mixer to the Ultranet, directly. So it's a slightly different setup than normally of what you'd have. Go ahead, Grant, and then Michael.
I was just going to add that having not heard the pre-discussion about this one, the XR18, if you didn't actually need to have faders and you're just happy with a handful of channels and you can use it on an iPad, then you could just put an XR18 on the stage, which is a super cheap solution. And then if you wanted to, you could do an X-Touch control of that, and you didn't actually have to do a digital multi-core or send audio over that at all. You're just doing control.
If you're ready to spend, if you already had the budget for $10,000 for a switcher, though, I would go with the X32s, as opposed to you'll hit the ceiling on the XR18 really fast. It's great if you're really, but if you're starting to do events and you start to see what's possible, you're immediately going to you're going to blow past what the XR18 can do. Like as a home mixer, or, something with a little, something with small events and so on and so forth. I think the XR18 is it's a great little mixer, and we've used it for managing all kinds of things. So I have a lot of experience with both that one and the XR12. But I would generally, if I'm doing an event, for me, table stakes is some version of an XR32. And then after that, you get into having, if you want more control, you might, like, for instance, at $10,000, I would probably be using a QL1, Yamaha QL1, and then I would use either a Rio as the stage box or an XR32 at the far
I think
end.
they were moving away from it because it was $10,000.
Oh, okay.
The way
well,
I read the.
But if you want it to be less, for $3,000 or $4,000, you can get a very, very robust kit that is going to give you a lot of growth. We've done lots and lots of shows with XR32. With X32s, and I would highly recommend it. I just think that the XR18 you'll run it. You can get it to start, but you'll end up replacing it. Roscoe, and then
That's a basic.
sorry, Michael.
So go ahead, Michael.
Yep.
Michael and then Roscoe.
Okay, one caveat. When you are running the Ethernet for the Behringer, it has to be shielded. Otherwise, you will run into a clicking noise that occurs. So you really have to run a shielded and make sure that those drains are actually attached. When you're doing that. Number one. Number two, I would stay away from the wireless versions. If you are outside in a parking lot, chances are you're going to have a ton of people out there outside in that parking lot too. And even though they might not be able to connect to that thing, there's still going to be the handshake going on. You're still going to get glitches and stuff in that. I would go with the hardwired S16s all day if you're looking to do a remote thing.
Well,
I'm sorry.
I'm
go ahead.
definitely not disagreeing with you on the on wireless versus wired. I wouldn't use any. I don't use wireless in core audio unless I have to, and if I do, I spend a lot of money on it because it's it just becomes a a thing.
Yeah.
So to your point, but I was just talking about using. I'd be tempted. The lowest cost version that would give me Dante would be actually an X32 rack in the front of and then and then an X32 larger deck with all their
console
faders and
surface,
everything
yeah.
else, the console
Well,
in the
and
back.
I mean, there's even the new wing that you can do that stuff with too. And the new wing, if it actually does everything, I still haven't had my hands on it, but 48 inputs, 28 buses, capable of 370 or something inputs overall, and will work as a DAW interface. So that one's got me a little curious.
Yeah, absolutely. Roscoe?
I'm good. We can go to Tuesday. It was a basic question on whether or not to put the Dante inside the mixer or whether it's just as good using an external.
Well, then you're buying an external solution for it. So I would definitely, they're hard to get right now, but I would definitely get a Dante board, for the, it takes like 6 weeks to order them, I think right now. So, but I would definitely put a Dante board in the mixer. Otherwise you're going to have to then interface from the mixer to everything else. And so,
right.
And so that would be my,
but there's no extra features you get because it's in the mixer per se, other than just ease of use.
Access to all those channels. Yeah. Yeah. I think that I'm not sure if all of the IO is exposed on the X32, that it's capable of managing. I'm not 100% certain of that.
Yeah,
go ahead,
it is.
Jeff.
It is.
Okay. Yeah, Jeff.
Another fairly inexpensive sort of stage box option that doesn't get you a mixer on stage like the X32 rack is the lowest Yamaha TIO 1608, which is designed for the TF series, but it's a 16 input with mic preamp, 8 output Dante box.
Oh, I
so
didn't
that
know
could go on stage and then connect to something else. Even could be a computer running Dante virtual sound card and some DAW if you were brave enough to mix your church show completely in software.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have been silly enough to do such things.
Almost all the manufacturers have remote boxes like that now. They've at least seen that trend coming and have caught up with it.
Well, the question is whether those
everybody.
The big question is whether those that support Dante or not. I mean, using things like Alternate really box you in my opinion. I mean, I think that you want to be using Dante, for anything that once you start getting at all serious about. And I used to not be. We had a lot of clocking issues with Dante where we'd hear clicks and dropouts and things every once in a while because we just, I will say with Dante comes great responsibility of there are some little gotchas. And so if you decide to go down that road, come back here and let us know when you're hearing the dropouts and we'll walk you through how to avoid that. But that has to do with where the clocking is occurring. And that's the one big gotcha that we got into when we first moved to Dante. A decade ago. Next question, maybe almost.
And Michael, you're coming in a little bit low. Jonas Dattel of Reutlingen is up next with recommendation for a budget LTE router as a backup.
And by the way, Jonas Dattel's is on the 17th, not next week, but we'll be talking about his hyperdeck solution at that point. Go ahead, Jason.
This is going to depend very heavily on whether or not you have good, solid AT&T LTE service. I have personally set up the Unify redundant WAN. Also, this is going to depend a lot upon whether or not you actually already have failover on the router that you are you're plugging into. So those two are going to depend. Yeah, those two are going to be a lot of it.
The two things that we use for that are PepLinks. I think PepLinks or PepWave. I always get the two of them. One's the company and the other one's the product. PepWave is one solution. It's kind of a generalized solution for us. And then we use Meraki because we have a Meraki system, and a lot of the Merakis can take a cellular. We're using a Z3C Meraki that allows you to put literally a SIM card into it, so that if it loses signal, it'll go to cellular. And we found that failover actually works pretty well. So we put those in our remote boxes, but of course that's kind of an expensive
budget,
solution.
Alex, budget.
I know. Yeah, exactly. So I'm just letting you know what the possibilities are of it actually working. So when you start dropping to the lower budgets, it just becomes, more of an art project and less stable. The PepWave and the Meraki, but the Ubiquity, if I'm not as familiar with the Ubiquity cell services, but something to think about. Most expensive thing in production is failure. Next question.
Gavin Grayshon is in from Manchester, UK, with, does the panel have any experience of cleaning and recovering moldy analog videotape? Mold spores can be invasive and cause tearing and splitting, even when gently teased off the reel. Asking about mold, not sticky shed, which is a tape thing on its own.
You guys send it to a professional. Like there are people that can help recover that, but but even then, it's going to be, once it's got mold, it's going to be a thing. Go ahead, Chris.
I was just saying, you're probably saying goodbye to.
Probably not going to have it.
That might be gone.
Yeah. Mold is a really hard thing when it comes to those tapes, as opposed to film, which can be sometimes picked up, but once it's there. But what I would say is, don't touch it. Don't try to do it. Don't try to go through anything. If you have any chance at all, you're going to find a professional restoration service. And I'm not familiar with what for VHS or magnetic tapes, but look around for that. Maybe we'll see if we can bring somebody in to talk about how bad it can get. But someone put that in the second hour, and I'll try to find someone to talk about it. But anything that's old, if you ever see mold or flaking on whether it's film or magnetic or anything else, you are now in the world of do not play with it. Like that, the knife is deep in the, and don't pull the knife out. You got to take them to a hospital, and so definitely be careful of that, of playing with it, because you'll try to, everything you do is going to hurt it, and it's not going to help. So next question.
Vincent Alvarez is back from Bellingham, Washington, with playing 30-plus PowerPoint presentation videos using VLC for a university conference, but some videos immediately start talking. Should I add a bumper for a few seconds? If so, with what? Full screen conference logo, animated, include music? What are the strategies for actually putting a beginning little trailer on it?
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Black. Always put in black between.
I'm a big fan of black. Like, I don't need to have a lot of other. I have to admit that I tend to be, fade to black and fade up, using any editing tool, of just having that. I would put that in, even if you're going to put something in between. So I would have, if you're going to put a bumper in there with some graphics and what's coming up next and all those other things, I would still have that fade to black and then fade back up to the presentation, as opposed to fading from the graphic. It just gives it, in a variety of reasons, it gives people kind of a bookend in that. Go ahead, Bill, and then Fenwick.
Just from a broadcast perspective, there's been a substantial change over the course of the last 10 years. They used to ask us for bars and tone and black and then that sort of things before a spot start. Everybody in the broadcast realm that I've dealt with in the past 5 years has said we want first frame of video to last frame of video, and all the rest of the switching and things like that happen around that. So it's content only, flat out to 30 seconds. We used to deliver 29 and a half. So it is a little tightened up in that sense, but I agree.
Except they're coming out of VLC.
A little bit of black before presentation is a really smart idea. So a second of black that's full before you get to the content for a playback in a venue is a really good idea.
Go ahead, Chris.
Aesthetically, it bothers me when text dissolves over a face. It just looks weird. And I know it's only 15 frames or 20 frames or 30, whatever, but I hate that. So I never dissolve from a graphic to a face. I also don't like black. And the reason I don't like black is it feels like the show's over. So I'd rather go through a corporate color, or dipping through white, but black to me feels like the end of a show. It's like, we're done. So but I never dissolve content over face or text over face.
Go ahead, Courtney, and then Roscoe, and then Sky.
One of the problems with having black at the head of each clip, if you're lining them up in VLC, is then the icon for each one will be black. So just looking at what you have lined up, you won't be able to tell, unless you're looking at the file name, what's coming up next, because they'll all be little black squares.
Roscoe, and then Sky.
Oh, VLC, usually you'll be looking at the playlist, so I don't think the icon color is necessarily the issue. But black tells the host that it's your turn. The show's not on you. We do it in theater all the time. We turn the lights to black, where we turn part of the set to black so that the audience knows to put their focus somewhere else. So it doesn't take away. It's not the end of the show. It just means focus on something else.
Good, Sky.
Yeah, to Chris's point, it's a transition, and consequently, to Roscoe's point, yes, historically theater, you end a scene and you go to the next scene. So that's a theatrical cue from long tradition.
Good, Jeff.
I'd grab a frame, the first frame of those PowerPoint slides, and stretch it out to a few seconds and fade up from black to that, so that it fades right into that slide, and then the talking begins. So you get a few seconds of it coming in. I think the biggest problem is that immediately start talking. That's really jarring for transitions.
Good, Bill.
And some playout software allows you to do a poster frame. So you grab something that's representative of the clip from inside and put that up on the board before you go to the black and the start.
I do love the fact that we've had it in the last hour. We've had a pretty deep discussion about HDR and how to play frames in VLC, how to play presentations in VLC. It's covered a lot of ground. All right. Next question.
Moving on to Bobby Spangler of Campbellsville, Kentucky, looking for a simple and easy to operate program to generate titles for a very basic church stream. Will the keying the titles over the live video, keying the titles over live video with an existing switcher. Currently have Pro Presenter, but it's overly complicated for this application. Think Little Church Lady as the operator.
Keynote. I mean, it's so simple. Like Keynote is so simple to do that. I mean, we've talked about it a little bit in the past. If you look back, you can produce those graphics and it all lays out. I mean, it's probably, I don't know of anything that's simpler than Keynote. I mean, you'd have to set up the project and save it as a template so that they don't have to think about whether it's a transparent background or black background or whatever it is. But if you set that up and then you just tell them, click on this and type it, I don't know if you're going to find anything that is as powerful and as simple as that than Keynote. We have graphics folks that send us stuff and we just realize they're just sending me a Keynote file. That's how they laid out all the slides, because it tends to, all the snapping tends to keep you honest and keep things looking nice, that type of thing. Go ahead, Jeff.
And if you can restrict your Keynote to just the title and the body, you can actually automate from a numbers document 2 columns into auto-populate the slides. You can enter it in a numbers document and then auto-populate. So,
and isn't there an app in between that to do that?
It's a JavaScript.
Mm-hmm. This is a JavaScript that you can just put all the lower thirds in.
Yeah.
So that's my recommendation on a Mac. On a PC, I don't. PowerPoint, I guess, but I don't know PowerPoint well enough to know. Next question.
Peter Moore of Auckland, New Zealand says, sorry if it's been asked, but will the DaVinci Resolve training be available offline for users in challenging time zones?
Yeah, there'll be record of the Q&A. Yeah, and then all the videos that you're watching will be, you're downloading them from Ripple. So yeah, the Q&A will be available on YouTube. Next question.
And Peter has another one here. He's asking, will Office Hours get its own dedicated YouTube channel anytime soon? I'm getting pushback from people that are reluctant to go to Alex's channel despite my reassurance that he's the guru, or at least a guru.
Yeah, we're hoping to get that done this month. Things got a little hectic and I just haven't been able to build it out. It's building out a channel is like you have to kind of think through the whole process of how it's going to be connected, what it's going to be called, and where it's going to go, and before you start like moving everything. It's not a trivial matter of, I'm just going to create a channel and start streaming to it. I mean, I could do that, but then so it's just I've just needed brain space to think about kind of the overall piece before, so I haven't changed it until then. I'm a little insulted that they just won't go to my page. I'm just kidding. Just having fun with them. Anyway, next question.
Next question has to do with something called SCIFs. Michael Fraley of Dallas-Fort Worth wonders if anybody's heard of it, and if so, what they can say about it.
SCIFs or SCIF?
He has a T in it here as he posted it, a SCIFs. And I just looked it up real quick, and it says it's a media company founded in 2012 that provides news, research, marketing services for the travel industry. I don't know if that's the right one he's talking about, but that's what I found.
I'm not familiar with SCIFT. I am familiar with a SCIF without the T. I don't know how much I can say about that, but I know what SCIFs are, but I don't know what a SCIFT is.
Well, they've been on the news as a secure place and for
Yeah.
like Congress to talk when
Yeah.
nobody can hear anything. So
So
that's
SCIFs
public.
are generally a secure room that people can work in. I'm not familiar with SCIFT. Go ahead, Roscoe.
It says it's about hotels, so it's actually like a news channel and news information about the hotel industry.
Okay.
So it's very specific. So
SCIF is what I meant. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, generally a SCIF is a it's a secure room. Oftentimes, you're separating a room out for security. Typically, it's government work that is done. I mean, it's most popular in intelligence communities, and so for you separate that out, and then you control access, and that access control can be various levels, but generally it's very high. It's generally to separate secret or top secret from non-classified. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, and I've heard about. I know nothing. I'm not under any NDAs or any security clearances, but I tend to think they build them like a Faraday cage or something like that, where there's something that keeps electronic signals from getting out, and there's usually some kind of protocol, from what I've read in general news stories, about not allowing anybody to bring any kind of devices into or out of those to keep the information that comes out in the room securely.
Yeah, there's a lot of different sets of rules, but depending on access, but that's. They're the secure rooms.
Yeah, I got an email asking me to, join the thing, but there's a fee involved and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, okay, wait, well, what am I going to use this for? How, why do I need this? So I figured I'd ask around.
If someone's asking for you to join a SCIF, it's probably not what I'm talking about.
No, yeah,
no one
SCIF
asks
as
you
a
to
service.
join.
I think that's a
SCIF as a
marketing
service. SCIF as a service sounds like a really great. Why didn't I think of that? That would be awesome. Is to have SCIF as a service. Anyway, all right.
It's
Next
also
question.
a Ukrainian anti-tank guided missile, so be careful.
There you go.
There you go.
That could be a service too. All right. All right. Next question.
James in Dublin, Ireland says, I just started painting a wall 18% gray. It's a lot darker than I expected. Should I be concerned? In any case, it is too late now. It's actually quite a dark gray. Thanks.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
it's all about making sure there's no reflections when you're looking into a monitor. So dark is not your enemy.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jeremy, and then Jason.
It obviously depends on your lighting, but yeah, it can be darker than expected before you get the light in.
And that's a little probe.
Yeah. This is the half mirror, half 18% gray for the VFX stuff.
Where did you get that one? That one specifically?
So this, I have had clients bring ones that they've taken from a garden center, which hasn't been great, but this is from vfx-store.co.uk, so they are Pantone specific and giving us the correct 18% gray.
Yeah, and that one specifically because the ball will pick up. I'm just letting everybody know how those work because I've used them a couple times too, and but that is you're getting diffuse lighting as well as reflections, and you can actually take that reflection. I believe that half will get you 270 degrees of reflection.
It will, yes, because obviously it's in front as well as the incidence angle to get around. So it doesn't give you a full 360 environment, but it gives you good reference to recreate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go ahead, Jason.
18% gray is gray that reflects roughly 18% of the light that is given to it. So if you're much darker than that, better shake your paint.
Next question.
Moving on to Carol Herndon of Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. I'd like to hear your motivation for sharing all this knowledge. It is informative and encouraging at a time when my business has shrunk due to the pandemic. Greatly appreciated.
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I'll just say a lot of us learn. I mean, when we were young, we tended to hoard information because we thought it gave us a competitive advantage. As we learned more and more and more, I think this is for me personally. I just learned that it took me so much time and effort to get from the basic idea of a thing to mastery of it, that if I shared the basics, if I just explained to people how it works, that is really not what gives anybody else a competitive advantage over you. The knowledge itself, I think, should be out there and as widely shared as possible to help as many people. You will always be out in front in terms of your ability to take that information and turn it into valuable services and things that you can improve your life by making a living out of it. But it's that overall you that is valuable, not the information. So I just like to share things.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
It's really mental exercise. I get into conversations this deep with students maybe twice a year, and we get into all this stuff. Whereas here, I mean, it is bang, 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 bang. And you know, it keeps you on your game. It makes you think that what you've actually learned might have some value beyond your own brain.
So, Sky.
Well, Alex, you introduced me. I touted the content as king, and you immediately came back. No. Community is king, and content is the honey that draws it together. And I also thought of Maslow's law of the basics that we need are what? Food, shelter, and human connection. So I've had one other experience of two other experiences like this. One of them on the Avid DS list, which was all text, but we ended up meeting at NAB and creating a community, consequently of like interests. And what we found is, while we're all geeks and you keep us our elbows in and focused on a certain category, the side opportunities of just connecting about grandchildren and dogs and certain things that we like about food. And so it's becoming a whole, connection of humanity. So for me, as I've said before in the last statement, it's my mental CrossFit opportunity of exercising social interaction in a category that I can make money in.
Yep. Go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, I'm here because it is a nutrient-rich environment to share and accept and to learn.
Yeah, I think that go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, +1 for keeping me on my game. I love this because not only do I get to learn, but I get to help with what I know. And that gestalt, the collective being greater than the one, to me is second to none. Plus, it's a community, and there's kind of nothing like it, especially in the era of COVID.
I think maybe a decade ago or more than maybe 10, 15 years ago, I really felt like what I knew was what got me work. That what and I slowly learned that it's who I know. God gets me work, and gets work done is who you know, not what you know. And I don't mean that. And so the more we can, as individuals, produce a service to our community, we get to know a lot more people. And I've, already, work has come in from this organization, from our loose organization for me. And I've been able to hire people, and buy things from folks here because of the community. And it's a tightly knit community, and it allows me to be more agile. And I'll say that I learn every day. And it's not. And the problem is that this technology is changing so quickly that if you only go to NAB or IBC, then it changed a lot over the last year. When we do it every day, it changes slowly, and we're just slowly, figuring out the best ways to do it and see the things coming out at pace, and assimilating it as a group. And I think that we're learning a wider breadth. There's a huge number of things that I didn't know existed when I started doing this that I now know because of all of you, because of questions like, Zoom OSC, I would have never even paid attention to going by, or many other things like QLab is something that we used, but I didn't really get how deep it was until people here were using it. And so those are good examples of things that I'm constantly, kind of assimilating, into my own workflow that I'm learning from those things. And so, and then as far as the industry goes, I think there's a huge opportunity. I think one of the initial impetuses that I had was that there's just I saw a huge opportunity to change the way we interact as human beings, last year when I started it. And I felt that if I didn't do something, that it wouldn't happen. Like, I don't know, maybe it would have happened anyway. Maybe that's arrogant to say, but it was kind of like, I need, I know how to do this. Like, it was just kind of like one of those things, like, I've spent 10 years doing virtual events, and virtual activations and everything else. I have a knowledge set that if I hang on to it, it won't grow as fast, and in the world. And I'm not interested in controlling some tiny little piece of the industry. I want to, light a fire and keep on, spraying fuel on it. And so, and have it change the way we interact. I've said this before, but I really feel like physical events are a detriment to a huge portion of the world. They're bad for the environment. They're bad for interaction. They exclude 85 to 99% of the people. I'm not saying they should never happen, but they shouldn't happen as often as they do now. We should be finding ways that we can include the whole world, that we can include people that can't make it there. And do it effectively, not put a camera in the back. I've spent a decade putting cameras in the back of the room so that everyone can sit at the kiddie table online, and so I'm interested in having meaningful interactions online. And I know that I had enough to start the fire, but what's happened is that all of us interacting with each other, we're developing, workflows and pipelines that are way beyond anything that I knew when I got started, and so, and so that's I've been, again, fortunate enough. I think of it as being a fad. A fad is being a floating attraction device, which fishermen use. So I was the fad that started it. But now there's this huge school of fish and all these other things that are all, wrapped around and interacting with each other, and a whole ecosystem that has very little to do with me, or much less to do with me every day. And so, but I'm still benefiting from it every day. Go ahead, Bill, and then Courtney and Grant.
I also just think the whole global game has changed. We're living in an era where you have an information device in your pocket that can connect you to almost any bit of pure data or information if you can figure out how to search for it. So information becomes less valuable. What is valuable is the curation and the understanding of how to deploy information and how to synthesize ideas from information. So that's what we explore here every day, I think. Everybody's got the information. We're here to talk about strategies for using it effectively. And that, I think, is really needed out there.
Yeah, Courtney, and then Grant.
Yeah, I consider this to be more of a platform like the forum was in the text world, where you could gather, and most companies have a marketing department which controls their exposure to the real world. And they are very closed-lipped about, because of trade secrecy and so on. So you won't get good answers out of a corporation's marketing department and even their technical support department. So they all have forums. And this platform is unusual. Like a forum, you get real users out there responding with their solutions to problems they've found with the product that the manufacturer may not even be willing to admit exists. So, and this gives you a real-time interaction, so it doesn't take, 6 weeks for people to see that post and respond to it. So it gives you an immediate response. So it's a much faster dissemination of information out of a group of people with a collection of knowledge.
And there's something that the forums are powerful, and Discord, of course, is what we are discussing. But there is something about every day having a audio discussion that delves into something that just wouldn't make sense in a forum. It would be too much reading, and it's something that we can listen to if we're not able to come and just absorb that information as a group, which I think is a step up from the last generation of interaction. Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, I was just going to say hi to Carol and sorry to hear that your business has shrunk so much. So many people have experienced that. And I think one of the things that has been so amazing about this has actually been that that Alex set the tone, for all of us, by openly sharing about experiences and ways of doing things and whatever, and then setting just some guidelines for us just to keep it focused, and that's worked so well. And what I have found is I was going to say exactly the same thing about, I felt like it was what I knew is what got me work. And now it's totally who I know and the relationship and how I serve them, how I serve their mission. And so me knowing how to use some tools or some tricky ways of doing things, when I share that, I get tenfold back. And that's what's happened as far as learning so many other things. And the other thing I feel like is doing it daily is that I feel like I'm marinating in it. And so whenever I have a conversation with clients or whatever, there are sentences that flow out of my mouth that I think, oh, gee, that sounded good, you know, or like, and the people that are hearing are like, they're hearing that for the first time, but I've heard it 30 times on Office House. You know, it's like these same sort of themes that we're coming across, and particularly around virtual events and hybrid events and that sort of thing. As an example, you know, I talk about virtual event is everyone has a front row seat. Hybrid event, the online audience has a back row seat. Now, the difference between Alex and I is that Alex calls that the kiddie table, which I think just takes that to a whole nother level than just the back row. It's the kiddie table. You want some little crayons and some paper back there, do you, kids?
I will admit that I over time I perfect the ability to demonize things with side comments. Like, just so you know, like it's not, I don't do it by accident. Like when I'm talking to clients.
I love that demonization. That's one of my favorites, because everyone knows the kiddie table at Thanksgiving.
People, when you can find a metaphor that really people get and that makes them cringe a little bit, but it's got to be right on the nose. Like, it just got to be like smack on the nose, and they get it and they understand why that's not there. Then you get real movement. And so, you know, finding the way to describe why it doesn't work is the key to that. But and again, as a group, we're all you know, we then cultural, you know, we become cultural around that, where all of us are thinking the same thing, and that's affecting a lot of things. There's a lot of people watching, and there's a lot of people talking about it. And yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
I think, as Grant was pointing out, this forum has given us the courage of our convictions to be able to go to people and say, this is how it needs to be done, because this will be professional and good, and this will connect with people.
Yeah. And I think that we're seeing, and we see the progress of folks that are coming in. I mean, a lot of us have made progress, almost all of us, but you look at, like, I think that Hosmuk is a good example of someone who just kind of came in, was kind of figuring it out. Now he's running events in South Africa, like big events, you know, and they keep on getting bigger. Before we know it, he's going to have like these events for like 30,000
for governments and
influencers. Yeah. So, but I think that and Tony and some of the other folks that you just see that have started, they start rough, and then they just keep learning from this group, and I find that to be a big success from my perspective, that folks and for Carol, you know, I think that there is an opportunity. What we're trying to get to is that there is an opportunity to be a business that's bigger than the physical events were. You know, when you were doing physical events, you were still constrained by time and space, and we're not. You know, and your market now is the world, and your market is, you know, and you know, and so I think that there's an opportunity to grow a business, and it may take a shift, you know, and I went through the shift that a lot of people are going through in 2020. I went through it in 2018, where I had to close my company because I bet too early on virtual events. So you know, I know what it feels like to have, you know, go from 30 people to 3 people in one day. You know, and so it's the hardest day of my life. So, Chris.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, we recently did some numbers on our company for 2020, you know, end of year stuff, and our gross is, you know, and again, we're post-production predominantly. We have in the past done a fair amount of production, but I've always said that purchasing a camera is really just a way of feeding an edit suite. Like don't buy a camera unless you have an edit suite to feed. But our gross was actually up a little bit, but our net was almost double, because we were so focused on doing post for virtual events. You know, so many people are afraid to go live, so they have to pre-tape it. And we were humming. We've added, you know, more virtual editors that are we have people in Seattle and Oregon and Utah, as well as all of our, you know, our staff in the Bay Area. And there's ways that you can turn this around. And I think, you know, listening to this crowd, I'm just constantly like rethinking what is down the road, what is 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road.
Right. Yeah. Guy.
Yeah, I'll sometimes look through the participants and just remember that we're here to serve the audience. And so it's like, what questions are going through their heads? And I'm just like, hey, can I help answer that question? And it's the more you give, the more you get. And so to me, it's just go out there in the forest and go cut the path. And I'm doing it with Zoom OSC. Yesterday, I fired off my first command through QLab and had it over the network control my PC. And, it's just fascinating to me to do something like that. And now I'll take a complex subject and distill it down and make it simple so that somebody like Carol, who may not have had a chance to learn networking or something like that, it's just like, okay, let me back up and explain this in layman's terms. And so I think I have a talent to do that, to take complex subjects and make them easy. And I think a lot of us have that. And so it's cool that we all share that way.
And the power, one of the things that we have right now that we've over time proven that we were going to have is persistence. And the important piece of that is that a couple hundred people have signed up for the Zoom OSC training, and out of that couple hundred, there'll be 100 or 150 that start becoming facile with it. But now we have this huge group of people that anytime you have a question about Zoom OSC, people in this community will know it, and we're connected to each other, sharing that information. And so as we do Resolve, and as we do more Final Cut training, as we do other, like all these other bits and pieces, QLab training, which I'm hoping to do, as we add those things, what happens is that the community, as long as we keep it valuable, becomes this kind of reservoir of information that we can come to when we need it. We may not need it right now, but not all of us. There's 3,000 people in the community right now, and there's 100 that might know that, or 200 that might know that, and they're all different people. But when we have that question, we have a group of people that can discuss it who have been using it, and that's the power, I think, of building the community like this. Go ahead, Bill.
And there's also one other thing I think we can't underestimate, and that's the trend assessment that this group does. So many people from so many places around the world bringing ideas into one thing that we discussed. Suddenly I'm hearing things, NDI, Unity, these things that were not part of my normal world, but that are changing the world around me. And I get validation because it's not just changing them for my area, my circle of friends, but I'm seeing people in different countries who are also catching on to these same things and validating, hey, this one's important, pay attention to it. It may change everything.
And we're building things that we benefit from down the road. Like Tucker learned about Unity from a project that he did within this group early on. And now I'm I pull Tucker into that little project where we're, and now I'm hiring him to do the Unity for, a project, and so that we've now done this long enough that the stuff that what we're growing, we're now harvesting. We've done this for a season now, and we started putting all these seeds out, and now there's actually plants that are coming back in. But it's hard to get to the point. I mean, obviously, the reason that nothing else like this exists is because it takes a lot of time. Like if we did this as a weekly meeting, it would have taken 5 or 6 years to get to this point. And so we're, that's the thing, and no one else has ever committed this much time to it as our group has, and I think that's why it exists the way it is. And it just happened at the right time. Next question.
Moving on to Ricardo Hicks of Raleigh, North Carolina. With the 2 and 4 ME switchers from Blackmagic, am I able to combine the upstream keys? I'm slowly converting from a vMix workflow and looking to simplify 4 and up to 6 up looks with a graphic overlay.
Go ahead, Jason.
Oh, no. I was about to, sorry. I was waving to everybody to say, I'm sorry, I got to go. So
okay, bye. All right, see you. Yep. You can, I mean, if you have 2 switchers, you could theoretically do that. Getting into those 4 and 6, 4 ups is easy, and 5 up is relatively easy because that's a super source with a DVE. And then after that, getting to 6 up takes a little bit of thinking. And typically you're now passing different things back and forth to each other. In the 4ME and 2ME only have one super source, so you're kind of limited in that realm that you could pass one, essentially pass a one super source to the other. So you'd have one super source going with 2 up and then being masked with another super source, over top of it. So it could be done to get those combined. When you start doing those things, that's where stuff like vMix actually starts to make more sense, because it and TriCasters do really well, is because when you do those kind of complex super sources, that's where the Atems don't, they're a little limited when you start going over 4 windows. And so the advantage, of course, is that it's still a hardware switcher and it's more stable. does what you ask it to do every time you ask it to do it, not most of the time. So that's that's the advantage of a hardware switcher. But what the fact that it can do it every single time you ask for it means that it has to limit what it can do, and that's the challenge there, Chris.
Ever so slightly off topic, which of the Atems have scalers on Teranex style scalers on all the inputs? Is it only the Constellation?
No, the Constellation. It's all the newer ones that they have. So they have the new like all-in-one switchers that are there's an HD one and there's also a 4K one, but it's the all-in-one switchers that came out in the last year or two, and then there's the Mini Pro and the Constellation. But the older ones that are the rack-mounted 2ME, 4MEs have not been upgraded yet. The production HD switcher hasn't been upgraded yet. So there's a couple of them that don't have those Teranexes in them yet. I would be stunned if we don't see most of those.
You think that's a 2021 upgrade cycle?
I do. I have no inside information, but I think that it's inevitable. Yeah. Go ahead, Michael.
Sorry, I tried to do the spacebar thing, didn't work.
Common problem.
I think it's because I was looking at Makana and that's what was on top. Anyhow, what's the benefit of the Pro ISO? What is it isolating? I mean, I understand what ISO does audio wise, but in video for a switcher, what is it isolating and why do you want that?
Go to Roscoe.
Basically, you get H.264s with all 4 streams, and you get an XML file that is pulled. You can pull it into any really NLE with translation, but right into Resolve, and you are ready to rock and roll with a timeline after you've switched a live show. So you can make the adjustments, do the coloring. I mean, it's really a nice workflow.
So if you wanted to record, if you want to do a record for something you're going to cut later, you don't have to sync any of the footage. You don't have to, it'll come right in as a project. So you could it'll record all the inputs that came into that mini on let's say a T5 drive. You throw a little hard drive connected to USB-C, then it'll just record all of the tracks synced together with a project file. And you just open up and Resolve and recut it. So that you could cut it live and use the HDMI out to cut a live cut. In fact, I think if you cut it live, doesn't the project file keep all those cuts in the ISO?
Yeah.
So
yes, it does.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you cut a show, you can cut. The main thing is your live show is never going to be as good as what you do in post. You could cut a couple little things out, recut. Oh, I really wish I wasn't on that camera. So basically, what you can do is cut your whole show on your mini, but then open that project with all the inputs that came into that mini and just tune up your edit. For post without having to just start from scratch again. So it's if you're doing a lot of corporate or training or education or anything, it's at a small scale. It's H.264, so it has some limitations as far as quality goes, but it's still great. Go ahead, Roscoe.
Well, yeah, but what we're doing is we're actually recording at the camera head also,
right.
At full RAW, and then we've got the edit. Now all we need to do is relink those files, and we have a 6K raw project live at the end of.
Will it do when you do that, does it sync the recording with the cameras with the record that's in the project file?
Yeah.
Can you activate the record on the cameras?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yes. And all the time code is identical.
Yeah.
I mean, it pushes all the time code to all the cameras.
Yeah, so then
it's great.
So you're just changing the H.264 up to 6K. So now you have a 6K.
Correct. 6K, just relinking.
Yep. 6K.
You got to have the hard
HDR.
drive. You'll be talking to OWC, but it's cool.
Yeah. Chris and then Bill.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised that because I use mine to record the Zoom Room feeds. I'm pleasantly surprised that it gets all time of day time code, and the ISO feeds on my 4 inputs, I only use 3 of them, are a perfect match frame to the switched master because it's the same hardware, the same signal path. It is a perfect match frame. And quite often, if you're going to touch up a switched feed, you have to let's take it back to the beginning of this shot. You don't have to do that. It's a really clean match frame. And if you're doing Zoom records, H.264 is pretty good.
You go, Bill. Then we'll move on.
When you do work
Pretty
in
quick.
the modern era, you're mostly generating metadata. And when you switch a show, that's what you're doing. This is a system that captures all of that and allows you to leverage it later to do all sorts of things way more efficiently than you could if you tried to recreate things from scratch.
Yep. Next question.
Paul Prusakowski of Gainesville, Florida, says Alex mentioned breaking the presenter and the shared PowerPoint screen out of a Zoom room into distinct NDI inputs. Does Zoom OSC currently work with the Zoom rooms to help manage this?
So what I didn't say is using NDI. I was using SDI. So I'm taking out of the Zoom room. I'm taking 2 monitor outs out of a Zoom room and converting those HDMI outputs to SDI and then putting them into my router. So I'm not using NDI for that, but SDI, and I don't know if it's possible with NDI. Grant.
Yeah, there's a couple of wires crossed there with the NDI and SDI. No pun intended. But it also the Zoom OSC. Does not do that, and then the other cross wire is the Zoom room. I so wish they didn't call it Zoom room, because Zoom room is a term that is generic. It's like the de facto term for what we're doing. It's like, okay, yeah, we've got a Zoom room there and we've got a Zoom room there, but it's not. We need to say that's a Zoom
and
meeting.
It makes it worse when they have breakout rooms, because then you really think of it as
exactly
a room.
Yeah. And so whereas Zoom room is a conference room system, which is totally separate, and that's what Alex is talking about, which can have up to 3 outputs, and it's a conference room headless device. And so once you install the software, then it's headless in the sense that you don't do any control through it. You use a separate controller to do it. But there is a way, even in just Zoom meeting, you can, with the dual screen output, you can mess around and you can get a speaker view and the shared screen view, full screen as well. And so it is possible, but way easier with the Zoom room.
Next question.
Benjamin Antiput, our show friend from San Carlos, California, says suggestions for budget HDMI recorders for under $100. He needs an SD card or other portable storage slot. Ideally records in 1080p or higher and has a loopback feed.
Go ahead, Ray.
Yes. Well, I ordered a riser unit from Guy down there at DVE Store. Works like a charm, has the feed through, and will do 1080p. And now it's not under 100, it's 129, but I think that's about as good as you can do.
Courtney, what are you using for record? He's working on it.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to look it up on Amazon. They're these little H.264 recorders, and I'll put a link, once I find it again, I'll put a link into the chat. They have HDMI in, HDMI out. They record onto a USB stick. There are some limitations there, and it's a pretty clean H.264. In fact, I'm looping through it, but right now, and it's going into my Atem, so it does give you, it can take care of HDCP because it's coming out of a TiVo, but and you just hit a button on it and it'll record 720p or 1080p.
And how much are they?
They're about $108, something like that,
right,
on
yeah,
Amazon.
So.
Yeah, I'll put the link in once I find it.
That's great. That's great. Next question.
Paul Pruskowski is back from Gainesville, Florida. For shooting a head-to-toe standing shot in a 12x12 studio with a Blackmagic Cinema Camera 4K, what are your favorite wide-angle lenses to use?
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
First of all, I'd say 12x12 is going to look almost like a mugshot. I don't know that you can really get a head-to-toe in that much space without pushing the subject right up against the back wall. I'd be leery of that.
And put it in one corner and go diagonal.
It turns out that the old wide-angle adapter for those HV cameras, was like I want to say a 77 millimeter. It will screw onto the front of a fairly wide, I think it's a 1.4. I'll have to look it up. But that's one way that you can get to a pretty inexpensive wide-angle lens. It's not those adapters, they're really thick and they add a lot of glass and they're not the cleanest, but it will get you that wider shot.
I wonder though if you go with a wide angle adapter, if you get squeeze of the subject, you might distort if you're doing people.
Not too much on this one.
Not too much. Okay.
There is a Leica wide angle, and I just can't, or a Zuko, not a Zuko, but a Zuko lens that Olympus makes that's pretty high quality, and I just can't find it quickly. But that one is a pretty solid piece of glass, and I'll try to find it and put it in the chat. But yeah, 12 feet is going to be pretty wide as far as that process goes. Next question.
Moving to Chris Fenwick of Sacramento. Been spending a lot of time thinking through the budgeting of online events. How do we charge for them? Currently, I'm considering a per presenter charge to cover the time spent with people. What are your thoughts on this plan?
I charge per presenter, but I charge per presenter with the kit generally. So sometimes sometimes we'll do ones without the kit, but it's usually a pretty hard push. It's only if there's a lot of presenters, and it would just be insane to send them all kits. But yeah, definitely charge per person, because each person adds a lot of, there's basically the production time of a rehearsal day and a shoot day, typically for us. And then there's some overhead for the actual management of the show. And then it's per presenter. Those are the big four, for me, those are the buckets. Unless someone's obviously asking for something special. But I mean, as a standard, like virtual, we're doing an event, and we have, there's the day that it takes, and there's the day before it, typically, sometimes one more day for prepping if it's a really complicated show. And then there's per participant. Go ahead, Bill, and then Grant.
Yeah, you shouldn't do this, but the idea of the old above the line production and below the line thing, the only real value to that was that it caused you to think in work sets. I think in what happens before the show that I have to organize, and what are the overall costs, what are my profit and things like that I must make out of this to sustain my business. Then in the center section, the production section, I would think about what are the things that are specific to how many cameras, how many people, how many hours, how many days, things that are extrapolatable that. And then in the end, the overall edit at the end, after I get all these things captured, what do I have to do? And for more presenters, that means more editing and more time in that. So thinking in buckets or similar to that or not similar to that, whatever works for you, might be a valuable skill to think about.
Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, I know this is slightly different to what you do, Chris, but we've got something coming up. We've got to record 150 presentations. They're all pre-recorded. And so we decided to go down a line of having 4 workstations across a week. And so then the budgeting of that was actually, I was saying that a lot of them are like 20-minute presentations, but I'm allowing an hour for each of the appointments. So you can spend a bit of time prepping, do the recording, they go away, and then that operator sits there and does the top and tail edit and cleanup, and then it's done. It's completely done, and we move on to the next one. And so budgeting for that was actually being able to say, okay, it's a bunch of studio time, it's the gear, it's all those people. That's what you're going to get across 150, people. It's just a slightly different way of doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
James from Orlando,
and
Florida.
By the way, for our folks, really just answer the question. Just hit it, because we're running out of time, and I have a hard out. So just if no generalities, just answer the questions here. We're going to go kind of speed zone. Next question.
James, Orlando, Florida. All the information is great. Will there be a focus coming up on Zoom OSC and Stream Deck?
I have to look at what Andy's going to do there. I think that there's going to be some discussion about the Stream Deck, and there's a lot of us that are using them together. So I think that once we get to the other end of Zoom OSC, there'll be a lot of discussion about Stream Deck and Zoom OSC. So next question.
Sam Dowling of Bristol, England. I was wondering, would office hours do a session on disabled talent, be them on screen or who work in production? There are a few of us who are disabled watching office hours. I, for one, would be glad to talk about what I use.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we just got to get it in the schedule. And this must be me getting ahead of it. Next question.
Sparks in Burbank says, having the oddest issue with ProRes files from a vendor. In every application, the file plays fine. In QTime 10, no audio. This normally is not a problem, but my compressor projects are coming out with no audio, even though I can hear it in compressor. Anyone run into this?
I have run into this, and I haven't found a solution yet. And I have seen this problem where QuickTime's not playing the audio, and I think it's because the audio is in a different track. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I ran across this when I was doing work at NAB. QuickTime as a container has all sorts of audio assignable things in there. And if somebody had a camera set on something, you might be able to hear the track played back on your computer, but it's on some sub track that's not being played out on somebody else's system. So open up the QuickTime file. I toss them into Final Cut 10 and then open up all the audio tracks and see if they put it somewhere weird.
Go to Roscoe real quick.
QuickTime 7 will let you look right at the files inside to see where they're at.
Not that we're bitter. Next question.
Moving on. Dan Chalmers of Glasgow, Scotland. When you take two SDI outs of the Zoom Room software, are you embedding the audio into both? How are you doing this? On Windows, you can only get the one embedded audio out on HDMI.
Go ahead, Grant.
Sorry. Yeah, I use a decimator as such the easiest way, and I'm using a PC on my Zoom Room. So 3 outputs. One of those decimators has embedded audio on it. That comes into my switcher, and now I've got audio coming from the Zoom Room.
I'm using Dante from the computer, so I'm not using the video. Doesn't mean anything to me. so it's the computer. It's PCs, and they're on a Dante network, and I'm using Dante Virtual to do that. So that's how I do it. Next question.
Terry Donor of Richmond Hill, Ontario. I've had a problem with an ATEM Studio HD Pro. It decided by itself to not pass audio. After discussing with Blackmagic Design Support, the solution was to do a firmware reset. Has any of the panel run into similar troubles, and how to avoid solutions? How to find solutions, perhaps?
I will admit that most of my pipelines are all dual systems. So generally my audio and my video are traveling in 2 separate worlds, and then they get merged right back in, and usually the switcher is not the place that they get merged back together. So I just don't see it very often. It could be occurring in my switchers and I wouldn't know. Go ahead, Bill.
All of our video and audio equipment these days is pretty much fly-by-wire, which means that when you boot it, it has to look for a whole bunch of things. And I've found that reality has caused me to have things not connect. And if I reboot it, sometimes it will connect. And the order of connection can sometimes be important. If you don't have a device on when you boot, it won't see it even after you boot it.
Next question.
Tyler Roberts of Chambersburg. Is there a way to manage 5 to 10 Zoom accounts? We are an organization with 5 to 10 paid accounts, and managing what is scheduled is becoming tricky.
Yeah, if you're managing them individually, that would be really hard. You want to set it up as a business account or a central account with an admin, and then fold everybody into it. Absolutely. Go ahead, Chris.
Once you do the business account, you can give other users on the account the ability to schedule for everybody and sort of overview everything. Also, I find it very handy with the Zoom Room. When you open up the iPad app, I can immediately see, oh, so Paul, Sasha, and Danielle are all in various meetings.
You can also see
super handy.
You can also see you can create overall rules of what is turned on and off inside the admin, so that you can say all the rooms cannot use this or can use this or are all set to this, and then you can lock them so that they're just, that's the way we do that process. And so you have a lot more control. The one thing I believe, if it's still the case, it was at least 6 months ago when we did this, is that only one email account can be connected to one Zoom account. So if you invite someone in by their email as part of your group, if they had their own Zoom account that they were doing their own personal stuff in, it's gone. Like, they become part of the Borg. So just be careful of the people we had people that were very upset by the fact that they got, we invited them to their Gmail account into the system, and then they lost all their personal stuff. It was all part of this, so you just have to know that when you send out those invites, you either use the business account or You just know that they got to use an account that they're going to administer it from. And one thing that some organizations do is create email accounts, Gmail accounts that they're going to administer from, and then different people log into those email accounts, and then administer lots and lots of events. Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, just quickly, it's worth adding multiple domain names as well. And so you can dedicate, when you add a domain name to the account, then anyone that has that email at that domain will get a Zoom account that will join automatically. It's very cool.
Yeah. Next question.
Mike Fisk of Spokane Valley is in with, I'd like to submit some suggestions for possible future guests and topics, if that's okay. If so, rather than here, where would I do so?
In Discord. So Discord, there is a channel that says second hour ideas, I think is what we have it called. And I look at that all the time when I'm trying to figure out what we're doing next. So the two things is to go there and to post new ideas, and please post often. And then the other thing for everybody else is to vote on those ideas, because if I see something that goes up and nobody voted on it, it's not at the highest part of my list. If I see something with 8 or 9 votes, I'm like, oh, I better put that in. So just know that's there, and it is a note structure for me. I have ideas of things I want to do, but it's important for me to know what you guys want to do. And a lot of you have contacts. I mean, we've had some great guests that have come in because someone here knew somebody and said, oh, I can bring this person in. Paul brought in South by Southwest. Jeff's brought folks in. Other people have brought suggestions in, and it's been really valuable. So please do that. Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you have a personal contact with someone. I know Sky has brought folks in too. And so we've just had a lot of great guests that have come from this group saying, I know that person, or I know these people, that type of thing. Q Lab was brought in, so a lot of different ones. Yep. Next question.
Michael Peters from Oakton, Virginia says, I did not ask this question yesterday. Sorry. I plan to use vMix calls to bring in 4 to 6 presenters into vMix. Currently, vMix Multicorder does not support vMix calls. How can I record 4 to 6 ISO records and a switched feed of the vMix session? Will 2 Odyssey recorders with an Apollo Quad plugin work?
Think that you would then need ISOs, because there's a limited number of outputs from vMix as well, and so I think that you would need to have the ISOs of those cameras, which you're not going to get from vMix Call. I don't think you can output them to external recorders that I know of. So I think that's going to be one of the challenges that you have there. I think everyone's trying to think through that, but I don't have a solution for that. Oh, sorry, you have successfully stumped us. Oh, go ahead, Guy.
I can't remember how many outs there are for NDI, but I would probably kick it over to NDI, and then there's a multiple way of picking up those through NDI recorder, and I think it's 4 though. I don't know how you do that many, but it would at least get you partially there. But if you ask that in the vMix forum and the Discord, I'll see if I can dig a little more, because I have it open right now. I was trying to answer that, but I hadn't gotten all the way through it.
If you see Leland on the group, he will probably be the one to ask as well. Next question.
Mike Burns, who's here often. Ecamm versus Mimo Live. Pluses and minuses? Go.
I think Ecamm's a little simpler and less expensive than Mimo. So it's probably easier to learn quickly, and it is a little less expensive than Mimo. Mimo is much more full-featured and more expensive. So as a result, it's definitely a different level of app than Ecamm. So with Ecamm though, you can do a lot of the basic stuff. It's just that Mimo is going to give you more control, and it's going to scale more than Ecamm. Go ahead, Chris.
My biggest plus for Mimo is in its name, MIMO, which stands for multiple ins and multiple outs. And that's where Mimo gets really strong, is that you can set up multiple outputs, including ISO records of feeds. And there's a lot of audio cross-patching ability if you're doing something complicated, very much full featured.
All right, next question.
And it's really a comment. James from Orlando just simply says, to office hours in general, thank you for growing the next generation.
Thanks, James. It's our pleasure. So, we made it to an end of another one, and it is really just I'm still amazed that every day we get up and enough people show up to do the talk. Like enough people show up every time to be in the panel, and enough people show up. It's this kind of you have to. It's just an amazing thing that there's
My
not a
wife
day
is
where
very appreciative because she gets a couple of hours without me that she can relax.
there you
Start
go.
her day
So-
without me being underfoot. Now they're all quarantined.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that and we get great questions that fill up however amount of time we have. I think if we had 3 hours or 5 hours or 24 hours, we just keep on coming up with more questions. And so and the thing is that, again, all of us as panelists, even though we're answering the questions, we're all learning from the questions. When you're putting those questions in, when you're thinking through those are your personal. We're bouncing off of each other and learning from each other. And those questions are just the context of the conversation. So it's just amazing. So thank you all for asking great questions. If you're an attendee, thank you all to the panelists who, all of you just keep adding to the value of what we're doing. So really appreciate you showing up every day. And we're going to start the post show. And some of you will keep on talking. Otherwise, I'll see the rest of you next week, or not next week, tomorrow.
Mañana.
I scared you, didn't I? So see you tomorrow. All right. Take care.